Awesome. I can see that you're all being let in from the lobby. Welcome along to today's session on urban soil biodiversity, the hidden key to healthy communities and thriving ecosystems. My name's Christy Spire, and it's a pleasure to have you online with us today, or when you can make it in your own time. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that is 4 stories below me. Ngadlu Tampanthi, Ngadlu Ghana, Yatanga Imparenti. That means that it's important and good that we acknowledge that we are meeting on Ghana country today. And I hope that you can stop and acknowledge the country that you're meeting from today as well, wherever you're joining in. So thank you so much for joining us. This is the second instalment of our seminar series for 2025, and we're running these to help share the great work that's happening right across Adelaide to make it cooler, greener, wilder and more climate resilient. And we know that each one of you is doing important work in that area. So thanks for everything that you do. This session is being recorded and will be available on the Green Adelaide YouTube channel, so you can find it there afterwards and share it with your friends and relatives. The session will work today with a 40-minute presentation from Jake Robinson, who will introduce in one moment, and then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for questions. And you're actually invited to ask questions at any time by putting them into the chat function today. So we don't have mics equipped today, but if you put them into the chat function or the Q&A, we'll answer as many of these as we can in that 15 minutes, and otherwise we'll get you some information afterwards if we can't get through all of your inquisitive questions. And then I'll let you know about what's coming up in the next webinar series as well. So it's my pleasure to welcome you today to a talk on a hidden yet essential aspect of urban life, soil biodiversity. Beneath our feet lies a complex and dynamic world of microscopic organisms that play a vital role in maintaining healthy ecosystems and influencing human well-being. Today, we are fortunate to have Dr. Jake Robinson, a leading microbial ecologist, to guide us through this fascinating topic. And I'm very interested to learn with you today, Jake. Jake's work bridges the gap between biodiversity and human health with research in restoration genomics, aerobiology, and I'm very interested in this one, soil ecoacoustics. So his insights will reveal how urban soil biodiversity supports essential ecosystem functions, strengthens climate resilience, and supports essential benefits for our immune systems. He'll also explore some of the threats that are facing our soils and practical ways that we can all be a part of restoring and protecting these ecosystems. So really looking forward to today. I'll stop sharing and let you share, Jake. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Christy. Yes, thanks for inviting me to talk, and thanks everybody for joining. I'd like to first acknowledge again that, yes, I'm here doing this talk on Ghana land and pay my respects to the elders of all generations, and really appreciate their kind of deep relationship with the land and soil. So speaking of soil, this talk's on urban biodiversity, the hidden key to healthy communities and thriving ecosystems. Okay, so I'm going to start with the question, what are soils? Bit of a fundamental question there. So soils are the foundation of terrestrial life. They are conglomerates of both abiotic, so non-living, and also biotic, so living components that form dynamic, complex ecosystems. So it's more than this kind of static, inert material. And it's inherently relational. So moving beyond this inert view of soils, lots of organisms live in soils and they all interact with each other and form part of the soil itself. Are soils alive? Bit of a interesting question there. So up to 99% of the planet's species actually live in soil ecosystems. So many animals live in soil and they contribute to diverse ecological functions. So, earthworms and spiders and beetles and ants, etc. They all play really important roles and interact with each other in the soil. And this is a nice little kind of comment from an article 2 years ago. If earthworms were a country, they'd be the 4th largest producer of grains. So this just really highlights the important roles of just one taxonomic group, really, in the ecological functions that they play in soils, such as nutrient cycling, etc. And so there's a few of the visible, the animals, etc. in the soil. But what really gets me excited is the invisible world. So there's a whole invisible world out there with many different species, all interacting with each other, all living in the soil. So we have bacteria, and we have archaea as well. So similar to bacteria, it's a completely different domain of life though, and they're often found in so-called extreme environments. So things like hot springs, but they also live inside us, these archaea, and there are many in soils as well. And we have fungi as well. So soils host lots of different kinds of fungi. Many, if not most, fungi are actually invisible, and they play important roles again in various ecological processes in the soils, including in urban soils. And then we have algae as well. So these often live in the top layer of the soil. They photosynthesize, they secrete or produce kind of polysaccharide, sugary substances. And these play a role in actually clumping soil particles together. So they play a role in soil aggregation. And this is important for things like reducing soil erosion. And the bottom ones in the middle, protozoa. So these are the first animal-like organisms. So you can think of proto as a prototype and zoa as an animal. So together, this is kind of the first animal-like organisms. Lots of these live in urban soils as well. And again, they play really important roles in things like the soil food web. And then we have viruses as well. So viruses are incredibly abundant in urban soils and other soils as well. We know what viruses are. We live through pandemics. Some of them cause diseases. Actually, many of them are really important in maintaining the biological equilibrium within our ecosystems. I'll talk a bit about that later. So we have lots of different microorganisms. So all these different organisms that we can't see living beneath our feet. So the top one is actually a virus in the middle. This is called a bacteriophage. It kind of hunts down bacteria and injects its genetic machinery into the bacteria so that it can proliferate. And again, this is playing important roles in keeping bacteria in check. And everyone watching this talk right now has 380 trillion phage viruses living inside them at any given moment. But don't worry, they're actually playing important roles. The top right is a tardigrade, often called a moss piglet or a water bear. These live in soils as well, most often found in lichens and mosses. So you'll find these in biocrusty soils. The one in the middle is a geobacter bacterium. So this lives deep down in the mud in urban soils, and it can actually generate its own electricity through these little protein nanowires that you can see coming off its body. So we have lots of different kinds of species, all these different microorganisms that we don't really think about that are living in the soils and that are playing really important ecological roles. And this is just a quick note on the size difference, so the scale of microbes that live in soils. So this little speck here on the screen is a virus, represents a virus, and this guy represents a bacterium. And actually, the largest bacterium is 37,500 times bigger than the smallest virus. So just to give you an idea, I think we kind of normalize the size of these microscopic organisms to be kind of similar size, but the scale is absolutely enormous. And this is exactly the same as comparing a single poppy seed on a muffin, as you can see here, with a blue whale. So the size difference is absolutely enormous. And a blue whale is all of these organisms combined. Okay, so I like to use this phrase, all the nature we can see intimately depends upon all the nature we can't see. And this is a really important point for this talk. So everything that we see with a visible eye, the animals and the plants, etc. So imagine walking through a park, you see a big tree. It's dependent upon these symbiotic relationships with the invisible constituents in this ecosystem, particularly in the soil. And so much as we can view ourselves as these kind of walking, talking ecosystems, we can do the same thing for trees, for instance. So that tree you're looking at, imagine looking at this urban tree in your urban park, quite a large tree, for instance. This we can consider, a community of life. It's not this individual entity. It's deeply dependent on relationships with microorganisms and other organisms and the soil ecosystem. So, you remove the soil, the tree's not going to survive. For starters, it's not going to be able to support itself physically. And, there's lots and lots of biological processes that are going on beneath the tree that's maintaining its health and survival as well. So again, just moving beyond this simple view of these plants and animals as these individual entities, they're actually communities of life in themselves, highly dependent on soil. So now you walk through your urban park. Now imagine looking at the tree again and, considering how many cells this living tree has. So it has around, in a 5-ton tree, average 5-ton tree, around 6.1 trillion living cells. And this is the tree's metabolically active cells itself. And very few, a very small proportion of the tree is actually alive. So some people say 1% mature can be hit by lightning, struck by lightning, set on fire, the whole tree can burn out, or it can be affected by rot, for instance, and rotted away. And the tree is still living though, because the metabolically active cells are still there. And this is quite an interesting photo from my childhood, actually. So a tree, an ash tree, Fraxinus excelsior in the UK, 30 years ago, struck by lightning. And as a little nipper, I was looking at thinking, wow, this is never going to survive. But 30 years on, this was actually a photo sent by my mother a few months ago. So the tree's actually really thriving. This is a note about the resilience of trees, which obviously depend on the soils. So now I want you to imagine walking through that park, looking at your big urban tree, and viewing it not as a tree, as an individual entity, but as this holobiont. So it's a host plus trillions of microbes working symbiotically to form this functioning ecological unit. A new article in Science said that more than 1 trillion bacteria live in the tree trunk alone. And if we can take into consideration the leaves, the branches, the seeds, and the roots, particularly the root zone is highly dense with microorganisms, then the tree hosts between 15.1 trillion and 115 quadrillion bacteria. It's absolutely mind-blowing numbers. And together, these form the tree holobiont, so the tree cells plus the microbes that live in it and around it. So a tree is actually between 68.75% and 99% microbial in terms of its metabolically active cells. So kind of mind-blowing numbers again. So moving away from numbers now, I'm going to start talking a bit more about processes and interactions. So we published this paper last year. It's called Food Webs and Food Webs. So this is the idea that we have this food web, traditional food web, where we have primary producers, and then we have herbivores feeding on those, and then predators feeding on herbivores, etc. They form these complex chains of trophic interactions. Now, if you zoom into one of the individuals within a particular population, this example, it's a rabbit, but it could be anything. It could be, a tree, for instance. If you zoom into an individual, what you'll find is a microbial food web. And importantly, the interactions within this microbial food web shape the health and the behavior of these individuals, and thus the trophic dynamics of the entire system. And in soil, there's these traditional kind of food webs. You have animals and plants, etc., algae, but you also have its own microbial food web in the soil as well. And then all these organisms in the soil, so these little earthworms, beetles, blah, 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 these all have their own microbial food web within inside them. And so it's just this idea of nested food webs, just to illustrate the complexity of things. It moves beyond these kind of abstract numbers and it gets really quite complex. My friend Heather Rumble, she's a researcher in the UK. She's a researcher in green roofs, particularly looking at the microbiomes. And she wondered if you could inoculate bacterial inoculants into the soils to boost the soil food web in the green roofs. And she found that actually bacterial inoculants, which is essentially cultured bacteria that you literally inoculate into the soil, she found these inoculants enhance the community of microinvertebrates in the food web as well. So this just illustrates again that the symbiotic relationships that occur between the visible and the invisible world, and we could potentially start to understand this relationship and apply it in these urban settings. This just illustrates one of the dynamics that occurs in these microbial food webs. It's quite a nice statistic. So every 48 hours, half of all the bacteria on the entire planet are killed by these phage viruses. And these come in all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So let that one sink in because it's kind of mind-blowing. So lots of different processes occur in urban soils. So decomposition, so soil biodiversity contributes to all of these processes. So they're really unsung heroes of our ecosystems. Decomposition, nutrient cycling, kind of one of the same. Nutrient cycling provides, the microbes and other organisms release nutrients so they become available to the plants, and this sustains the plant's health and survival. Soil structure and aggregation, so biodiversity in the soil contributes to this aggregation. As I mentioned, it's important for things like preventing soil erosion. It can also have a role in things like flood prevention by influencing the water infiltration process. Microbes also contribute to the plants' immune systems in the soil as well. So they can form these biofilms that are important for protecting plants. Microbial phytohormones, so microbes produce certain chemicals, other chemicals that keep plants healthy and thriving and productive. Symbiotic relationships, I'll talk a bit more about this in a moment, between, for instance, mycorrhizal fungi and trees. And then biodiversity in the soil contributes to other abiotic factors such as salinity regulation. So there's lots of different processes. There are many more as well, just to give you an idea of what's happening below the ground, beneath our feet, as we're walking through an urban park, for instance. Now, this is quite nice. Well, it's not nice, but it's quite a stark headline. So the trees in our cities are dying. A sick microbiome may be to blame. And around 34 to 40% of newly planted trees in various areas across the world die within the first few years of life. This is a really sad story, isn't it? And lots of things contribute to tree mortality in urban areas. So, watering regimes, just urban heat island effect, even the tree grates around the bases of trees can damage the trees, cause girdling, and cause death of the trees as well. But I think probably a key contributing factor to the tree's death is, going back to this headline, is potentially related to the microbiome, particularly in the soil. So again, we need to recognize that there is symbiotic relationships that occur between the invisible and the visible world. And at the moment, most of our thinking is only going towards all the visible aspects, which is understandable because it's hard to appreciate what you can't see, right? So we need to be thinking much more about these symbiotic relationships with the soil microbiome, for instance, I think, in order to allow trees and other organisms in our urban environments to thrive. And this kind of links to how our cultural view of soils. So this statement from the UK in 2016, 58.7 million tons of soil was removed from urban areas. So soil is removed during construction processes. And 55% of the tonnage, so the so-called waste that went to landfill sites, was actually soil. So the majority of waste, so-called waste, that went to landfill sites was soil. That's mind-blowing as well to me. But it's a kind of reflection of how we view soils as basically it's dirt. It's this inert material that we can just toss away. So we really need to change this perspective as well. So various things, stresses affect soil microbiomes and soil health in urban areas. So, you can think of chemical pollutants, and I can talk more about this afterwards. But there's also noise pollution as well. So there's a global rise in noise pollution, which is known to affect wildlife. And we think that it's actually affecting soil health as well. We need to do a lot more research on this, but this is the way we're thinking at the moment. So can we mitigate the noise or, reduce the noise to promote soil health in urban areas? This is an interesting study. So artificial light at night triggers negative impacts on nutrient cycling and plant health regulated by soil microbiomes in urban ecosystems. So illustrating that this global rise in light pollution is also affecting soil health. Okay, this is a bit of a radical question. So do soils think? So soils don't have this kind of unified, they don't have prefrontal cortex and hippocampi, etc. But, as a system, they do exhibit complex self-organizing behaviors that resemble decision-making. Cue the Wood Wide Web. So this is a very hotly debated topic at the moment in science. So this is the idea that, there's this vast biological internet below the ground, beneath soils. But then there's these symbiotic relationships between the mycorrhizal fungi and the trees can communicate and help each other out through this mycorrhizal network. And it's always this kind of communal and very friendly relationship going on. And this was popularized by Professor Suzanne Simard, who I really like her work, and her quite famous book, The Finding the Mother Tree. As with these big scientific claims, there's lots of critics as well. So one of the main critics is Professor Toby Kears, and I really like her work as well. And she talks about, she's not denying that these kind of networks exist underground, but she thinks it's much more about fungi and trees in this kind of market trade relationship as opposed to this kind of, helping each other out altruistically. So the widely reported claims that trees use the Wood Wide Web to signal danger, to recognize offspring, or to share nutrients with other trees are based on thin or misinterpreted evidence. This is one of Toby Kears's most recent studies actually. So a traveling wave strategy for plant and fungal trade. So fungi build dense highway systems to transport resources between themselves and plants with remarkable efficiency. And they adjust their networks, structure and flow speeds. By doing this, they balance the energy required for exploration of nutrients and also the energy required for trading these nutrients between themselves and the trees as well. So pretty cool stuff going on. So this is just a quick note on anthropomorphism. So the critics of the Wood Wide Web largely say, it's too anthropomorphic, fungi and trees aren't best friends, etc. And I found this image quite amusing. Anthropomorphism is this idea that we project human-like behaviors onto non-human organisms through our cognitive biases. And the critics say that this is quite funny, actually, because the critics use kind of anthropomorphic language, I think, as well. So they talk about fungi as being market traders and punishers who reward plants that are generous. So all of these things are, attributed to human behaviors. What can you do? So moving beyond the semantics, mycorrhizal symbiosis, occur between plants and fungi in an estimated 85% of vascular plants. Now, in urban ecosystems, there's conflicting evidence to what degree urbanization actually influences these mycorrhizal relationships. One study that springs to mind shows that chemical pollution is detrimental to mycorrhizae. Another study shows that these mycorrhizal fungi, these symbioses, are actually vital in allowing and enabling urban trees to withstand these novel pressures such as pollution, urban heat island effect, etc. And then again, just going back to this headline, the trees in our cities are dying, a sick microbiome might be to blame. Just to reiterate that we should be thinking about these invisible symbioses and applying this thinking of the mycorrhizal networks and symbioses to the microbiome thinking as well. Disclaimer, so I've already used an old reference, haven't I? Elvis, who knows who he is? So old cringy reference coming up. Okay, but apart from providing 95% of our food, filtering water, storing carbon, regulating water flow, providing raw materials, decomposing waste, producing medicines and supporting infrastructure, what have soils ever done for us? So apart from all these so-called ecosystem services, they influence our health as well. So do soils shape our minds? Loaded question. So soils give us 95% of the food that we eat. And soil health is intimately linked to plant health. The quality of the food we eat shapes our gut microbiomes and various other physiological processes. And our gut health shapes our mental health. Okay, so there's this nice illustration here on the right that's a simplified version of complex reality, but it shows that poor soil is linked to poor plant health, which is where we get our foods from, which is linked to dysbiosis in the gut, so poor gut health, which is being linked more and more to demoting favorable mental health. So there's this idea of the microbiota gut-brain axis, this two-way bidirectional communication system that links the central nervous system, the brain, to the gastrointestinal tract. And essentially microbes living in our gut microbiome can kind of communicate with our brain and vice versa. And it's thought that, dysbiotic gut microbiome, which is linked to, things like antibiotics and poor diet, etc., which itself is linked to poor health, poor soil health, now this dysbiotic microbiome is linked to various neurological conditions and mental health conditions, and vice versa. What we call eubiosis in the gut, so a balanced, healthy microbiome, is linked to more favorable mental health. I can talk a bit more about that as well afterwards. So we're actually going to be running a speaker series in September. So this is part of what consortium we've just formed called the Grounded Minds Consortium. So nourishing the soil, gut and mind connection. This speaker series is going to be called Soil Yourself September, which Martin Breed came up with the name for that. And yes, this will talk much more in detail about this soil gut mind connection. So watch this space for that. And so what about other health benefits? So what do urban soils, for instance, how do they affect our health? So we're protected by two nested layers of biodiversity. The microorganisms are the outer layer, so in the soil, the waters, plants, animals, etc. And the microorganisms are the inner layer, so the human gut, the skin, and the airways. And our bodies are colonized by microbes from this outer layer. So we're colonized by microbes from the soil, for instance. And we can view ourselves as these walking, talking ecosystems. So we emit millions of biological particles all the time. We're constantly inhaling and ingesting millions of microbes and millions of spores and pollen, all sorts of stuff from the air. And largely this is fed by the soil in our urban ecosystems. Graham Rook, he's an immunologist in London, he likens the human immune system at birth to a computer system. He says at birth, our immune system has the hardware in place, and this is analogous to the cellular structures of our immune system. And then he says we have the software in place, which is analogous to the genes that encode for various proteins that allow our immune systems to function. But he said the one thing we lack at birth is data. Much like a computer needs data to work, so does our immune system. And so the data he's referring to is exposure to lots and lots of different kinds of microorganisms from our natural environments. This is important for three main reasons. The first is because microbes train what's called our adaptive immune system. Now, exposure to lots of different species allows our adaptive immune system to build up these tiny armies of memory cells through it's called an antigen-specific response. And by building up this repertoire of these memory cells, we're able to recognize pathogens in the future and mount a much more efficient immune response. The second reason is through what he calls the old friends hypothesis. So this is the idea that we've co-evolved with certain microbes over thousands of years. They've played a key role in shaping and regulating what's called our innate immune system. Now, without proper regulation by these microorganisms, the idea is that our innate immune system, which is also known as non-specific immunity, will basically attack ordinarily innocuous substances like pollen and like dust, and even our own cells as well, our own human cells. And this manifests as an autoimmune disorder. So without regulation by these old friends microbes from the environment, from the soil, then our innate immune system doesn't know what not to attack, essentially. The third reason is what's called the competitive exclusion principle. In ecology, it's the idea that we have a diverse microbiome, which again is fed by the soil, through the air, through our diet, the food's covered in microbes. And this having a diverse gut microbiome means we're much more likely to outcompete incoming opportunistic pathogens. So it's this kind of no room at the inn effect. So just to summarize, we need to be exposed to healthy urban soils because of the microbes in them that train our adaptive immune system, that regulate our innate immune system, and then there's this kind of no room at the inn effect. It's actually more of a no room at the dining table effect, though, as a study showed a couple of years ago. So microbiome diversity protects against pathogens by blocking nutrients, essentially. So as this image illustrates, having a more diverse microbiome is essentially related to a higher colonization resistance. And the way this happens is these microbes that are long-lasting and well-established in your ecosystem, your gut ecosystem, they consume the nutrients that would otherwise be available to these fleeting opportunistic pathogens. So we're constantly falling apart all the time. Something like 98% of our atoms are replaced every year. We're emitting microbes, falling apart all the time, literally. But we're also ingesting and building ourselves back up with biogenic compounds through our diet, through exposures. And this is a really important reason why the quality of our environment that we live in is a key determinant of our health. So this is the old friends hypothesis, or the biodiversity hypothesis. We've moved away from our ancestral biodiverse environments towards more industrialized, urbanized environments. So we're actually less exposed to biodiversity. And there's these two global megatrends at the minute: biodiversity rise, biodiversity rise, immune disorder decline. No, the other way around, biodiversity loss and immune disorder rise, sorry. So basically we're less exposed to biodiversity, so microbial biodiversity in the environment. This leads to a microbial imbalance and a disturbed immune response, which then leads to a higher risk of inflammatory diseases. Just to illustrate this example, and also just to show that we can do something about it in urban areas, there's this nice Finnish study, and they've done a few now. This one's a nice one. They're a biodiversity intervention. They essentially identified a load of schoolyards in Finland, and they were quite desolate, so they didn't have much nature in them. Then 50% of them, they brought in forest floor materials, so the soil and the leaves and the trees, etc., from local areas. And then they kept the control group as quite desolate. And after 27 days, what they found is that the children's skin microbiome and the gut microbiome significantly increased in alpha diversity, which is generally considered a good thing in the human body. They also found that this associated with enhanced immune function as well. And they did a follow-up study a year later, and they found these effects remained. And it had this dual effect on the microbiome. So bringing in local forest soils, etc., into these environments, it increased the diversity of the skin microbiome and the gut microbiome, but it also reduced the relative abundance of pathogens as well. So it had this dual benefit. So this just illustrates, we can do something about the health issue and, the lack of nature in our cities, and we should be doing something about it. This is a study from my PhD a few years ago. This illustrates that the fact that there's a vertical stratification in alpha diversity of microbes, so the number of different species of microbes decreases from the ground upwards in the air column. And again, this highlights that the soil is one of the most biodiverse habitats on the planet, and it feeds the microbes in the air. So the things that we're exposed to as we're walking through our urban park largely come from the soil. So this is an important reason for our health, and why we need to, sustain soil health as well, because we're exposed to the components of the soil that influence our health. And this is just one of the box plot graphs from the study to show this stratification. And actually, children are probably more exposed to a higher diversity of microbes in the air column in these more natural environments than adults, based on this stratification. So a cool researcher in our lab called Craig Liddicoat, he did a mouse study on the similar principles. So he blasted these trace levels of soil dust over mice, and the soil samples came from varying degrees of levels of biodiverse soils. So high biodiversity soil enhanced the gut microbiome of these mice, and then this is correlated with reduced anxiety-like behaviors in the mice. Okay, so this is kind of the final-ish section. So I'm going to be talking about some of the research we're doing. It's only an example of some of the things we're doing, but it's quite a cool area called ecoacoustics, and also this area called sonic restoration that we're trying to develop at the moment. So ecoacoustics, this is the idea that we can listen to, Mother Earth. We can listen to the sounds of the Earth using this cool technology. So contact microphones attached to various devices that we place in the ground, and then we're recording the sounds, the vibrations of the critters that live in the live in the soil. So the worms, the beetles, the ants, etc. They all emit slight vibrations that we can detect, and then we record, and then we use these wave files and we run them through special algorithms that then provide us with an acoustic index score, for instance. And this acoustic index score gives us an idea of the complexity of the soundscape in the soil. And we use this complexity of the soundscape score as a kind of proxy for the biodiversity in the soil. And we've correlated the complexity and diversity of the soundscape with the number and different kinds of invertebrates living in the soil. So we can actually listen to the soil and begin to get an idea of a component of soil health. So really it's a diagnostic tool. So it's a bit like going to the doctor. Probably don't want to go see this guy, but he'll put a stethoscope on your chest, listen to your lungs, listen to your heart, and give you various health-related diagnostics. So we're doing a similar thing for the soil. We're listening to the metathorical heartbeat of the soil. So these vibrations are emitted by the soil organisms, and then we're developing tools to be able to use this as a soil health indicator. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'll play it for a second just in case. So this is actually a recording of one of the soil samples, and this is probably, earthworms and beetles and stuff moving around. This is kind of bubbly sounds. I'll just play this for a few moments just in case you can't hear it, because then you'll just be listening to silence. But just to give you an idea, basically it sounds like a load of bubbly, like blub, 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 blub kind of sounds in the background. So that's the sounds of little critters moving around in the soil. So this is a couple of figures from some of our other work of research. So we're trying to develop classifiers. We'll be using machine learning techniques in the future to see if we can differentiate between certain taxonomic groups based on these vibrations that they emit. So for instance, based on the fact that certain invertebrates have more higher number of appendages, or their texture's different, or their size is different, all these kind of things. And early results show that we seem to be able to tell the difference between things like a snail versus a worm versus a spider versus a beetle, etc. Species level differentiation is probably going to be much harder, if not impossible. And so right now, I'm just going to finish. I think this is the finishing topic. It's called sonic restoration. Sorry, this is the idea that we're using sound. So now we're listening. Firstly, we're listening to the sounds of the soil to see if we can understand the soil's health in order to diagnose it and then intervene to improve the soil health. And now this sonic restoration is the idea that we can use sound and stimulate soil organisms and plant microorganisms to speed up and enhance the restoration process. So as New Scientist headlines suggest, fungi grow faster if you play sounds to them. So the way this works is, much like humans have lots of receptors all over their bodies to detect various vibrations, and this gives us contributes to our perception of touch. Microbes and plants, they don't have these receptors, but they have what's called mechanosensitive channels. And when these mechanosensitive channels encounter a mechanical pressure, for instance, an acoustic wave, which is a mechanical pressure, then these essentially deforms the membrane of these organisms, which then leads to an influx of ion channels into the cells, which then we think is kind of leading to a cascading of effects that can turn on and off genes responsible for things like productivity and growth rate. So these are the kind of mechanisms that we think are at play. So essentially, microorganisms, much like plants probably do, respond to sound and actually increases their growth rate and activity. So this is a proof of concept study last year, and the top 3 rows show the group that received acoustic stimulation, and then the bottom 3 rows is the controls. They didn't receive acoustic stimulation, and you can see that there's significant differences in the growth rate and the sporulation, so the number of spores that the fungi produced. And this fungus was particularly a plant growth promoting fungus as well. So it's this idea that we can use sound to try and enhance the restoration process. And we might be able to select certain parameters that inhibit pathogens, for instance. And, this is kind of just a joke, but we've kind of joked about getting students together to put forward their favorite music genres, and then we'll play these to microbes and see which ones, has the most beneficial effect. And there's this, again, kind of a bit of a joke, not really. It's this idea that we can create this kind of biodiversity jukebox of sounds to help restore ecosystems. I know some people are doing it at the Uni of Adelaide to encourage oyster colonization, for instance, in oyster beds. So we might be able to play different kinds of sound parameters to inhibit pathogens or promote beneficial microbial assemblages in soil, for instance. And this is just a figure from a grant application I put forward. We're trying to also understand if anthropogenic noise in urban environments affects soil health. So I mentioned that anthropogenic light does, but does anthropogenic noise? And if it does, then what kind of mitigation strategies can we develop? And that's the end of my talk. So I'm just advertising my books here because I do talk about a lot of these concepts in both Tree Wilding and Invisible Friends. And I think that's it. And I'm also doing a charity, sorry, it's a bit of a plug here. I'm also doing a charity ride, 2,000 kilometers in 10 days to raise money for local restoration charities. So if you fancy donating, then you can scan the QR code. Thank you.
Amazing. When are you doing that?
That's in April the 18th. I'm doing it. I'm just training in a minute. It's a bit of a killer, but yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes, well, you've crammed a lot in there. Thank you so much. So fascinating. So many little pathways to go down after this, that's for sure. But yeah, I've got a few questions on here for you, so we'll try and get through a few of them. Just zoom back up again. Bruce just had a question around, which I think is a great one. Many urban areas have soil brought into them. How do we enhance the soil that's coming in to be, to actually enable healthy native plant growth, given the new soil may be different to the original? Yeah, it's
a good question. So a lot of soils are brought in. A lot of them are kind of just recycled from construction materials and kind of so it's we kind of need a bit of a survey going on what kind of soils and where they come from. Certain things you could probably experiment with. I think for starters, you've got to understand the kind of physical and chemical components of the soil before you can start thinking of the living stuff. So maybe doing some sort of test to understand what the components are before you, for instance, start bringing in more nutrients, because it could already be quite high in nutrients, for instance. So you can do these basic kind of physico-chemical tests to understand those properties of the soil. That's probably a good first move. And then, we are experimenting with things like microbial inoculants, where we transfer, whole soil samples from flourishing ecosystems and then implant them in degraded soils. We're actually trying to move more away from that now, because it's obviously causes a negative impact to the donor site. But the answer to this is maybe to create these more targeted cultures of microorganisms in the lab. And this can be done using the microorganism samples from these flourishing kind of soil systems. And then we inoculate the soils with these culture-based microbes. It's very early days, so we're it's very experimental at the moment. But yeah, good question.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we need all those good experiments to be happening to help into the future. Another good question here is, drought is an increasing feature of our lives in southern Australia as climate change accelerates. What practical steps can we take to retain and build soil organic carbon in our soils? Yeah, with that kind of change ahead.
I mean, there's lots of ways to think about this. So there's a couple of studies that we're involved in the minute, called climate adjusted provenancing. So we're kind of selecting plants from this gradient of climate. It's climate gradient going north. So we're selecting plant varieties that are already well exposed to these future conditions, and then seeing if we can mix them together. And then we're comparing those to the local provenancing, so where we collect seeds from a local area, and seeing if that mixed strategy is better than the local provenancing strategy. So there's those kind of things that we're thinking of. Again, it's quite early days, but we're experimenting. Again, there's these potentially a microbial inoculant approach as well, where there's one study that showed if you collect microbial soil microbiomes from sites that are already well adjusted to, again, warming drought conditions, and then inoculated the tree seed saplings with these already well adapted microbial inoculants, then it actually increased the survivability of the trees, which obviously these symbiotic relations are really important in the carbon storage in the soil as well. So yeah, it's quite experimental, but we definitely need to be thinking about these things for sure.
Definitely. Another super practical question here from Samantha is, how can we test soil health cheaply and practically and then improve it as we need? I'm not sure what scale she's thinking of, but maybe, council scale as well as your backyard scale.
Yeah. I mean, so you can do kind of DIY projects to look at aspects of soil health, because there's various components of soil. It's not like you get this kind of test that says this soil is healthy. Again, this is kind of chemical, the physical and the biological components. You can do something called, I've done with some uni students a few years ago, called radial chromatography. It sounds quite complex, but if you like YouTube it, you can basically get a couple of chemicals. They're not very expensive, and they can get an idea of the microbial activity that's in the soil. It gives you this nice visual kind of ring shape on these kind of filter papers. That's kind of stuff if you're just kind of generally interested in understanding very basic level of microbial activity. But you can, collect soil samples and send them off to various labs. I can't remember the one that we use in Perth. It's something like CSBP, something like that. I can send the details later. And it's only, I mean, I say only, it's kind of £40 to £50 per sample to get an idea of the physical chemical components of the soil. So it's not super expensive if you just want to get an idea of what your soil properties are like. And then more of the microbial stuff to understand, the composition. That's kind of, again, £50 to £100 per sample. And then when you want to really look at what those microbes are doing, their functional roles, you do things like metagenomics, and this is kind of £200 to £400 a sample. So it increases the more in cost, the more kind of detail that you want to get. But there's various things, and again, you can kind of listen to the sounds of soil. So we're listening to soils, and we're getting an indication of a component of soil health by how diverse the soundscape of the soil is. And this isn't very expensive at all, really. Once you've got the audio recorder and the contact microphone, then you've obviously got it for life, as long as you don't break it. So you can take as many recordings as you like, and it doesn't cost any more than that initial outlay of money. A few thoughts. There's probably a lot more that I haven't thought of, but yeah.
Is there You just got me thinking as you're talking then, is there any citizen science kind of projects set up around soil yet, or is that on the horizon maybe? I can imagine, yeah.
I mean, I think there are. Like, I'm not involved with any
Mm.
citizen science soil projects
Specifically.
specifically, yeah. But there are various groups that I know are working in the area on, kind of taking people out for soil pit days and showing them the importance of soils and stuff. It'd be really cool to get citizen science in soil ecoacoustics going if anyone's interested. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Mm.
awesome. Yeah, we'll dig out a few of those links for people in terms of where to go for soil testing and that kind of thing afterwards. And then, yeah, other projects that might be out there that people can jump into as well. All right, I've got a few more here. I'll just go back down. Sorry, there was one down below that I just wanted to grab before I went up to the other one. Someone's been loving your talk, Elizabeth. Have you thought about collaborating with local councils to reduce pesticide use to enable the recovery of soil biota in urban parklands?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I've only been here for like a year or two, so there's various things I haven't yet got my fingers in all the pies yet. But
Yes.
yeah, I'd love to collaborate with councils to reduce the impact on chemicals on soil health in urban areas for sure. I haven't done yet, but yeah, very open to doing so. And
Yes.
also just understanding all the other pressures as well. So I mentioned it's not just the chemical pollution. There's a growing issue of noise and light pollution in the world that we know is affecting wildlife populations, and we think is affecting the soil health. We just need to do the research. So hopefully in the future we can probably collaborate on there's ideas like wildlife sensitive lighting designs and stuff. So it might be soil health sensitive lighting or noise mitigation strategies that we can develop as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, you should be able to do the research and all the action and all the connecting,
Yeah.
all from one person, Jake. Come on.
Exactly. Yeah, what am I doing? Wasting my time. Yeah.
At least there's a team of people. This is a broad reaching question that maybe your research might have touched on a little bit. What cities, states or countries are setting like the benchmark in terms of best practices for urban soil outcomes? Are there kind of any that you'd direct us to if we wanted to
that's a good
look
question.
through?
Tricky one. It's a good example. To be honest, I'm not saying that all cities are terrible, but I've not seen any kind of cities that really have a really robust kind of soil health
Yeah, and that
strategy. They might be
focus,
out there.
yeah.
I mean, again, it's a growing field, and that kind of appreciation for soil and microbiomes, etc., is starting to happen now. So I'll have to think about that. Maybe I can dig something out and send it to people. But I think probably in 5 or 10 years there'll be a much more greater appreciation of these things that we can't see that play a really important role in our ecosystem. So hopefully there'll be better strategies then.
Yeah. There's some questions here now. Yeah, that's a great question. There's some questions here now around like soil that have gone through droughts and everything, and how they, do they recover? Are there any studies that find differences in soil compositions during a drought or long periods of dry?
Yeah. I mean,
do you have any? We could probably link people off to some of those.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'll try and dig some studies out, but I mean, there are studies that show that drought does affect the microbial composition of the soil, which then obviously has these knock-on effects on general soil health. There are certain microbes that play important roles in the soil ecosystem's ability to respond to drought, and plants' abilities to respond to droughts as well. So certain microbes have these functional genes that really enhance a plant's ability to tolerate drought conditions. So yeah, there are various studies out there.
Yeah, great. Awesome. And is there a difference between, this is a good one, in terms of, and I'm assuming there is, but in terms of sand dunes with vegetation, like would they have different microbial makeup to, say, a different type of soil?
Yeah, for sure. So soils are, so I keep trying to use the word soils instead of soil, just telling myself off in my mind because it's a plural concept and they're very relational and diverse and heterogeneous. So lots of soils, even in the same kind of area, you'll get a different kind of composition of organisms living in the soil to somewhere, 100 meters down the road, for instance. So the difference between those two kind of soils in quite close proximity is quite different, then you can imagine the differences between the community composition, for instance, between a sandy soil and a clay soil. The composition will be very different. And certain sandy soils probably won't have the right materials to retain a lot of the microbial diversity as well, and provide that organic matter that enhances microbial diversity as well. So both the kind of diversity metrics and the beta diversity, the composition will be very different between different soils based on their soil properties.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's very comprehensive answer. I had cheekily asked a question as you were talking about the Finnish examples in playgrounds around if there's any Australian studies, and Rachel Hamilton has shared a few. Adelaide Uni have done a few that I'm aware of, designing healthier cities with good bacteria. She's shared the links, and then a return to the wild for better immune health. So that's also Uni of Adelaide.
Yeah, there's a few studies going on. There aren't many, to be honest, especially at that kind of high level or that more detailed level biodiversity intervention. So I think we do need to be doing more of those things. I think some people are kind of put off by the big ethics applications that you have to put forward to deal with humans. So a lot of the studies are environmental characterization studies rather than that kind of linking that then to downstream health impacts. There's someone called Natalie Newman who left our lab last year, and she published a paper actually in Adelaide schoolyards comparing the soils and the sand pits, actually the composition of the microbes and soils for sand pits, and then linking that to the kind of correlating that to the vegetation in the wider area around the school. So that's quite an interesting study to look up. And then, as I say, we developed this Grounded Minds Consortium. This will be continued to develop over the rest of the year, and there'll probably be all sorts of these kind of biodiversity health studies coming from that in the future as well. So watch this space. Yep.
Yeah, awesome. And is there are there people, agencies in government looking like they're willing to support these kind of, because these studies as well, because it's kind of intersecting across multiple parts of government and that kind of thing. And so interdisciplinary
I think
research is, it's the way forward really, but I suppose we can encourage people to invest.
I think that's what we need to do.
Research.
Show the value in it, because we're ecologists, so we really care about the environment. Not that we don't care about human health as well, but that's our kind of our passion. And so if we can show that it's really important to restore environments for human health as well, then hopefully we can get more attention and more investment that way. I must say that the research councils, it's quite tricky to apply for funding in this area, because the two main ones in Australia is the ARC, which is quite hard sciencey focus, and from our perspective it'd be more ecological sciences, and then there's the NHMRC that deals with the human health. Because this kind of sits in the middle, it's quite tricky for either one of those to put money at it and fund it. So hopefully that will change in the future. I'm hoping that I'm not kind of dissing them for not being interdisciplinary enough, but hopefully they will take on these kind of projects in the future. Because if we can get the research funding to show the value in it, then that's obviously the key thing that we need to do.
Yeah, definitely. And which takes me back to a little bit of what you were discussing at the beginning around, some of the tensions in this space and some of the languaging and the way that we talk about this as well, because I feel like that really influences the way that you can get that cross investment and that people can understand themselves. Because as you were talking about that at the beginning, I was like that, it's that nested approach is what a lot of people are talking around in terms of complexity science, in terms of the human side of things, as well as soils. But a lot of the way that our systems operate is not nested, is not recognizing that interconnection. We talk about it a lot in terms of everything is connected, but our frameworks and our mechanisms prevent us from really acting like that. And that research, getting research funding is a really great example of that as well. And so, just wondering what you've thought of. I know we're all coming at this from different backgrounds and that kind of thing, but I do feel like how we talk about this really can help
I think
as
so,
well.
I think Yeah, language is massively important, and generally just science communication. So
Yes.
I have a bit of a passion in science communication as well, because there's no point doing the science if no one's actually listening to it or learning from it. So I think maybe embedding communication within science projects more widely needs to happen. So people doing PhD should be better equipped to be able to communicate their science to policymakers, for instance. So that's a massive, important point to make. The communication is key for sure. It's kind of why I write books though as well. Not that I'm trying to plug my books, but trying to,
No, yes.
trying to translate this complex science into more intelligible forms so people can actually see the value in what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. No, please do plug your books, and because I do think it's it's important for us to kind of go down into these worlds, and bringing to life what's invisible is such an important skill set across the board. So it's great. I'll just see if there's any more comments that have come through or questions. Joanne Buckskin, hello. I'm so in awe of my First Nation ancestors who were amazing, caring for the country, and our 21st allies such as Jake. So there you go, bit of encouragement there for you. I think we've covered off on most of the questions, which is great. It sounds like there's lots of research going on, so we'll make sure that we send everyone lots of different links. Nat did have a quick question around, are there any specific studies being done on nature strips and verges that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. There probably are, but it's not my particular area. But I know a couple of people actually in the council that are working on that kind of stuff, verges and their kind of functional importance. But I mean, we can chat about that after. But
yeah, fantastic. We held a forum last year, I think it was, and lots of interest around improving nature strips for all manner of reasons. So
awesome.
We'll try and dig down and share those with people as well.
Great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. But thank you so much for your time today, Jake, and pulling that all together and telling us this wonderful story and drawing us into that invisible world. I learned a lot.
Thanks
and I'm sure everyone online did. I think at one point we almost had up over 85 of us online right now, so that was awesome. So thanks everyone for joining in today at the end of your work day. We will email you with a link to the recording and links to the further research and anything else that's come up in the chat that we didn't get to cover. Our next session is on the 9th of April, and in this session we'll be discussing woody meadows, a new approach to low maintenance urban landscapes. So connected to this one, but for sure, and that's with Associate Professor Claire Farrell. So we're looking forward to that one as well. Please share that around, and we'll send more information to remind you closer to that date as well, so we can hope you can join us. And you can find all of our webinars on our Green Adelaide YouTube. So we're going into our second year now, so you can dig back and find some other ones, like the one from Martin Breed, a colleague that Jake referred to earlier as well. So awesome, lots of great feedback coming in for you, Jake, so we'll pass that on to you as well. And thank you everyone for joining in. One quick question. Where do people get your books?
They're online if you Google my name, and probably in Dimmicks in the city. Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome. That was a question from a person, not just me as well. So fantastic. Excellent.
Thank you. Cheers.
See you all next time.